Welcome to Happy Crappy Paints, part number 9, where we do the Pict hunters for Conan. Starting with a base coat of white for all of them. I also decided to mount all of them on color jars for the colors that I don't intend to use. I prefer this method when painting a lot of minis versus having them on a long strip of cardboard, for example. So I find it easier to have them individually but mounted on paint jugs. Using Raycart Flash as the skin tone, wanted a light skin tone, and use washes to darken it later. So that's all of them base coated in Raycart Flash. Water the base coat of the paint a lot and apply multiple layers because there's lots of nice detail that you don't want to lose. For the bone and stone axe, I used Ushabti bone for the shaft of the axe. Also the bone that the Pict hunter has in its hair, and also in his belt or in the back. Use Ushabti bone for that as well. You will see that I will start using a wet palette after a little while. Do that from the beginning. Don't wait like I did. Use one right away. It helps keep the paints wet and not to start drying. When you are painting this many minis, it's very beneficial to use a wet palette. For the loincloth, using Steel Legion drab. Again, even though it takes a little time, use more water than you think in multiple layers, because you do not want to lose any of the detail in these minis. These are great minis. Lots of really nice detail on them. Also Steel Legion for the ropes that hold the blades of the stone axe to the bone shaft. You don't have to be super careful here. Just apply enough to overlap onto the stone of the axe, and try not to get any of the Steel Legion on the plugs that goes through the shaft of the bone and the stone axe to hold the stone blade in place. The detail there is going to come through when we add shading. Here I'm making corrections. Here you can see I'm showing the wet palette that I'm using. It's just an ordinary plastic box with sponges in them and some paper, and then like tissue, soft tissue, to soak the water up top so it won't be at the bottom of the plastic box, and then a sheet of baking paper on top. Here I'm making corrections to the Steel Legion and also to the bone axe. So I'm also painting the little leather straps that holds the bones on the back of his fur there. I'm using rhinox hide for the fur in the back. It's a nice reddish dark brown. The wet palette also enables you to put the lid back on and pause. Putting the lid on the paint bucket will keep them fresh for an hour or so if you need a lunch break or just a coffee break. Here I'm making corrections to the skin, record flash. Again, the wet palette helps here because you keep the paint fresh on the palette while you're going through the different minis, and you can have different colors on the palette at all times and go back and switch back to the colors you used before, not having to bring the paint jugs back out again, and so you have it all on the palette. Stormworm and Fur is what I used for the stone blades. You can use other grays, perhaps Ashen Grey that we've used in the previous series. If you lighten that up with some white, you can use that as well. Since I had Storm Vermin already from other minis, I decided to use that. Here it is beneficial if you went outside of the leather straps or the ropes holding the stone axe. If you went a little on the outside of that, it helps when you add the stone to not get any white between the ropes. For the codpiece, for the skull there, I'm using Screaming Skull. It's a little lighter bone color, not as yellow as a Chape de Bone, but you could use a Chape de Bone as well. For the hair, I'm mixing Ashen Grey and Abaddon Black. There is an ear showing on the right side of the mini. I decided to not paint that because it was very hard to see, but if you look carefully you can see it. And if you'd like, you could add some Raycarth flesh there to show the ear. The inside here is quite hard to do, but if you're careful enough, you should paint the hair all the way to the base of the neck and on the side of the face and head. Moving on to the severed heads, I used Kislev for the face. Going to use a wash over them later, but I wanted a light skin tone to make the faces not too dark. For the hair, for the severed heads, I used Aveland Sunset. Again, I wanted to have a bright and light hair color, and I decided to use the same hair color for all of the heads. You could do some variations if you'd like, but being lazy and in the interest of speed, I wanted to use just the one tone. I also decided that he's carrying the heads in their hairs, not adding like a rope or something through them, which actually might be what he's doing, but I decided to use the same hair color for that, so he's carrying them in their hair. Seraphim Sepia, it's a really interesting, nice wash. Works very well with Chape de Bone. uh, to bring out a weathered bone look. So cover the axe completely with this wash, Seraphim Sepia, and then take off some of it from the stone, otherwise the stone blades of the axe will be brown. So bring some back out. But now you can actually see, I'm going to show it soon, here, that adding this wash helps create the detail around the bone on the axe. And you don't actually have to paint the plugs that goes through. The Seraphim wash adds the right amount of yellow tint to that. You could also use Seraphim Sepia for this shading of the skin. It's something that creates a more human-like Pict hunter, rather than maybe perhaps a troll or a caveman type skin tone. But Agrax Earthshade is what I decided to use on all of the minis, except the one where I tried Seraphim Sepia. And it actually looks quite nice, so it's an option that you might want to consider. But give the mini a good wash. Take off some of the shading on the tops of his shoulders and his thighs, and try to let the shade pool underneath his arms and in the recesses of his muscles on the front to bring out the contours. You can use earth shade on the fur as well and the loincloth for simplicity's sake. Dry brushing, you're going to be a master of dry brushing when you're done with these. It's great to learn dry brushing techniques on the Pict hunters. Since you have many of them to do, you will, like I do, try different things and learn a lot. I've had too much paint on my brush in some instances and too little in some others, and you're gonna, after you're done here, have a really good feel for how much paint you need, depending on what parts you're doing and how much detail there are in the mini for the sections that you're dry brushing at the moment. So this is actually a really good learning exercise for dry brushing these Pict hunters. When you do dry brushing, try to brush against the detail of the mini, not in the same direction, to make sure you don't get paint in the recessed areas. Sometimes it's hard on this mini to do that, so when you are dry brushing in the same direction as the recesses in the mini, go extra light and take the extra time to go light, so you won't get much paint in the recessed areas and lose the contours. The backsides of the thighs is hard to reach here, but also we're using this Raycart flash for dry brushing the furs out, so you don't have to be super careful not to hit the fur. You know, also Raycart is also good for the hair, so dry brush a little bit on the hair as well with Raycart to bring the detail out there, or the highlights. That's Seraphim Sepia and how that shade comes out. So you can see it looks quite nice. After dry brushing, the tone difference between the bone shaft for the stone axe, there is enough difference there to not look or make the mini too bland So it is important that you do quite a lot of highlighting if you use Seraphim Sepia, so that there is an actual difference between the tone of the bone shaft and the skin of the Pict Hunter. But it comes alive really nicely when highlighting the Rekarth flesh back up. So I liked Seraphim Sepia perhaps more than Agrax Earthshade, to be honest. I have more comparison shots at the end of the video. You can see the difference between the two shades. There you go. Looks really good. That's the comparison between the two skin tones. The one to the left looks, like I said before, more like a caveman or troll-ish character, while the Seraphim makes it more of a human. Adding some dry brushing to the stone axe. I've been skeptical to the Games Workshop dry paints before, since you can use any color when dry brushing. But the dry technical paints are really good to use actually here, because you could almost paint with it, and it adds or comes on to the mini on the edges really nicely. So this is actually a good use for the Games Workshop dry paints. So I would actually recommend getting some Terminatus stone, because there's plenty of uses for that when doing basing, for example, or painting stone. But again, you can just use any paint and use the normal dry brushing technique. Adding some weathered, chafed look to elbows and knees, wanting to make the Pict Hunter look like he's been being a really rough character, hunting their prey on their hands and knees. So I added some Rakeland flesh shade to the hands, the knees, elbows, and the soles of their feet. I also decided to add some flesh shade to the lower jaw, making them look more barbaric. Perhaps showing that they're using their teeth while fighting as well, so they're biting their victims. So that's how it looks when it's dried. Adding a very simple blood effect if you don't want to mix the blood colors. I've used Caribou Crimson for the severed heads, and also letting some of that wash drip and run down his left foot. And I am adding a blood effect as well, but that's optional, so I put that at the end of this video. This works quite well, even though it doesn't give that fresh blood look like you get when you mix the blood, like I'm going to show you how I did at the end of this video. This could be, I was quite happy with this blood effect, and decided at the very last minute to add some real blood effects. I had to go buy some paints to do that, so I figured that first that I wouldn't have time to really go get some new colors to get the blood, so I just added the Caribou Crimson. To shade the hair of this severed heads, I used the Seraphim Sepia. Here I just added a short clip of the baking of the paper for the wet palette, and just switching it out, adding new colors. I'm suggesting anyone to use a wet palette at all times, actually, because it's very, very good. Because it keeps the paints fresh, especially here when you're doing lots of details. It takes a longer time, so the paint won't dry while you're painting many miniatures. So I'm using Rhinox hide for the necklace, the two necklaces. I'm also using Rhinox hide for the leather straps on the belt that holds his skull codpiece there. There are ropes going into the eye sockets of that skull that are probably skull white at this time. So I wanted to make them brown again. So I added Rhinox hide for those leather straps as well. And then Ushap de bone for the teeth in his necklace. The armbands could either be leather. I decided that they were finger bones, so I added a Ushap de bone for the wristbands as well. There are what could be knuckles on the finger bones, or metal rings on the armbands as well. So you could just paint them all Ushap de bone, or do what I did and add some metallic colors to the wristbands. It won't show much, so it's definitely optional. I'm using Ironbreaker to make it a very bright silver for the ring on his necklace. I also decided that there was a piece of metal to his left side, the left part of the necklace as well. So there's silver both on the ring, on the left, and then also a little bit to the right side there. And then for the knuckles or links on the wristbands, I used Ironbreaker for that as well. And that's it, actually. You could be done here. So painting the bases black. I've seen some concerns that the black on the edge of the minis will wear off when you put the colored rings on the minis for Conan. So you could paint the rings in different bright colors four in each color. I decided not to and not worry too much. If the paint comes off, it comes off. It won't show anyway when you're playing the game, when you have the rings on. So that's the Seraphim Sepia variant. Now done. And here's the Agrax Earthshade variant. Done. So you're done here. But if you'd like to add, go ahead and do what I did and add some blood effect, you could continue a little bit further with the video. So using X27, the Tamiya Red, there's plenty of guides on YouTube guides on how to make blood. I'm showing it here anyway, how I'm doing it. So just adding a little bit of Agrax to the X27. So mixing that together. You could wait a little bit to make it more clumpy. I decided I wanted it to be running, so I'm adding some water to it. I wanted it to be quite runny, but depending on how you want the blood to behave or look, you could use more or less water, and also wait a little bit for the paint to dry a little bit, and so it becomes droplets and thick. I decided that I did not want that for the Picts. And then I just put on a little bit around the severed heads, let it run around the foot and the leg. Also add some for his hand or hands. Don't overdo the blood. It easily looks strange if it's too much blood. So try to have some restraints when adding blood effects. Better to do too little than too much. There I've added something around his mouth, as if he would have been eating a little bit, and then wounds on his shoulder. And try to do little different blood effects for the different Picts to make some variants among them. Perhaps adding some wounds to them. Some maybe have blood up to their elbows, or a little stabbing wound in his chest, or on his head or forehead. Let it run down a little bit. You also have a little wound on his back there. So that's it. After the blood effects have been applied, I'm now done. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. And next up, we'll probably do the giant snake. Thanks for watching.